Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our annual Social Justice Research Symposium. I'm Ryan Craig, and I serve in our Office of Mission and Ministry. On behalf of my colleagues at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs and the Center for Social Justice Research, Teaching, and Service, I am delighted that you are here with us today in person and on Zoom. This symposium features Hoya researchers in CSJ's signature fellowship program, the Education and Social Justice Project, a 15-year-long collaboration of the CSJ and Berkeley Center, as well as other undergraduate fellowship opportunities across campus. You will hear more about each of these undergraduate research opportunities before each panel. Special thanks to SETS and the Berkeley Center crew for managing tech logistics today, and the operations team at the CSJ for setting up our event space. A few notes on logistics. Each panel of presenters will share their research, followed by Q&A reserved for the end. And to our audience members on Zoom, please put your questions in the chat, and they will be relayed to our student researchers during the Q&A section. With that, I would like to welcome Maria Moreno, who will introduce our first panel. Thank you.
Do I call the panel members already?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Carrying too many stuff. Okay. So, did I feel that? Okay. So, and many glasses as well. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'm Maria Moreno. I'm teaching professor from the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. I'm thrilled to be here with you today, and because I see so many, students, former students, dear colleagues. This first panel features the Education and Social Justice Fellows. These fellows conduct field-based research on global, local initiatives at the intersection of education and social justice. The fellowship is a full calendar year and includes an introductory research methods course and 3 weeks of on-the-ground research and digital scholarship training for fellows to publish their case studies. All of the past projects are available on the Berkeley Center's website. In this year, 2025, ESJ awarded summer fellowships to 4 students who spent 3 to 4 weeks in Spain. We extend our deepest gratitude to our host partners at Comillas and Loyola Universities for the hospitality, mentorship, and care they provided to our students. We want to lift the staff and faculty at these institutions who provided contacts, fielded questions, took the fellows to local sites, and made themselves available for Zoom calls. I will now introduce all of our fellows before inviting Madison to open our panel. This summer, Madison Ross and Ali Schlicht conducted field research with Comillas in Madrid, Spain, and Cici Sprouse and Stella Vance were based at Loyola in Seville, Spain. This is our plan. At 10:10, Madison will start, and then 10:20, Ali, 10:30, Cici, 10:40, Stella. So Madison?
All right, sorry, technical difficulties. How are you guys doing? Good morning. Hi. Thank you all for being here. We all really appreciate it. My presentation is titled Cultivating Personal Responsibility, a University Community's Effort to Address Environmental Passivity. And before I begin, I just want to thank Dr. Craig and Dr. Hosseini for your guidance throughout this entire process. I want to thank specifically my partners at Comillas as well for welcoming us into their community. And before I really get into anything, just a little bit of an introduction. My name is Madison Ross. I am, again, a 2025 Education and Social Justice Research Fellow here at Georgetown. I'm originally from Illinois. I'm a junior in the College of Arts and Sciences, majoring in government and minoring in education, inquiry, and justice. So there was a nice intersection between my studies and my research there. And my table of contents, so I'll start by giving you all some context as to the community that I was researching. Then I'll go over my research generally before diving into one of my 3 main findings. And then I'll provide a bit of an overview for what I plan to do with the research moving forward. So to start by building context, this is a picture that I took of the Royal Palace in Madrid, Spain. Very pretty. So we were located in Spain, all 4 ESJ fellows. Spain is a really interesting context. So Ali and I were in Madrid, which is in the center, that pink star in the middle of the country, and Cici and Stella were in the south in Sevilla. Spain is about a 60% Roman Catholic country. This is important because we were all located at Jesuit institutions, so that's directly related to sort of the culture of Spain as a whole. But there is a layered religious history that I want to mention because Spain has undergone sort of a conquering, reconquering by both Muslim and Catholic groups throughout the last 2,000 years or so. So that's sort of important to note as we interact with the modern Catholic identity of the country. As I mentioned before, the capital is Madrid, and while I was there, I was very aware of my own positionality as an American researcher, as sort of an outsider entering into this space. If you want to know more about us sort of being accosted as tourists, just ask me in Q&A. But narrowing in a little bit, we were located, Ali and I, in Madrid. My presentation is on sustainability. So as I was sort of walking through the streets of Madrid, I noticed a couple of things. One, there are a lot of recycling bins everywhere, all over the city. This is one in a metro station that I saw, but this was not an uncommon sight throughout various locations in the city. And I also saw some examples of sustainability in the culture of the city. So here is a recycled street art installation that Ali and I found walking around our apartment, which is very cool. They use some recycled bottles and jeans. So sustainability is something that's already very present in Madrid as a context. But narrowing in a little bit more specifically, I was located at Comillas University, which is a Jesuit institution that developed from initially being a seminary in the late 19th century. Their mission statement is to transform students into competent and ethical professionals committed to social transformation. So social justice is something that is very, very much promoted by the university itself prior to my research. This is the campus that Ali and I were located on. They have a couple of different ones. Think of this as the equivalent of like the Hilltop. They also have sort of a downtown campus, but this is one of their main campuses. And now to give you a little bit more of an overview of my research, I focused on environmental ecology. My point of contact's name is Heike Pintor. She is the coordinator of the Integral Ecology and Sustainability Program in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Comillas, so faculty being the word for department here. And this program promotes several different kinds of activities to promote sustainability at Comillas' campus, including they have this garden. I got this small strawberry from the garden. It was very cute. It was out of season, but it was there. And they also do things like informational scavenger hunts, workshops, and speaker events to teach students, staff, faculty members at the university about how to be more sustainable. So they're promoting sustainability on their campus. Now, there are some policy layers behind this, right? So sustainability is not something isolated in Comillas. It's built into these layers of policy. I didn't necessarily want to put Pope Francis above the UN, but I do feel like it's sort of a background to a lot of UN policies, so it's there. It starts with Pope Francis's Laudato Si', which is a document that the Pope put out promoting this idea of care for the common home and also ideas of integral ecology. So it relates to sustainability as well as sort of a general idea of care for the whole person. Feel free to ask me more in Q&A. And this has somewhat informed the UN and EU, so these international, broader environmental policies, which inform Spain's own national climate-related policies. Then we get to this other level of Madrid. And their policies, they have some low emission zones throughout the city that I found very interesting. So cars are banned from certain sections of the city to prevent pollution. And finally, at the bottom, it's blocked by this text, but is Comillas' Integral Ecology Unit, which is where I was situated in my research, so sort of nested in all of those layers of policy there. Now, what is the Comillas Integral Ecology Unit? So it's, again, based on Pope Francis' Laudato Si', and I was focused specifically on one of the 7 types of ecology. Feel free to ask me more about these in Q&A, but I was focused on environmental ecology, which is what you would probably traditionally think of as sustainability. Other things here relate to just sustainable living generally, whether that's in your spiritual or social life, very much regarding care for the whole person. So here are some examples of things that the program and the Integral Ecology Unit in conjunction have done. Here's another shot of the garden at Comillas' campus. They have a greenhouse. This is primarily staffed by faculty at Comillas. They do run workshops for students, but it's not student-run, so it's very much like a faculty promotion at this point. And they also promote sustainability across the campus. So here you see some recycling bins, sort of mirroring the colors that I saw in the recycling bins in the metro, and then also this infographic to teach people how to not waste water, other sustainable practices, things like that. So now getting into my research overview, this is actually a picture of my walk away from Comillas, just a little bit of a sidebar. I didn't know this when I was taking the picture, but that's a military training site. Yeah, there were tanks. Just ask me more in Q&A if you're curious. My main research question, this was based on conversations with my partner prior to me starting my fieldwork. It was, what barriers or factors influence how Comillas community members interact with these programs? So essentially, what is either preventing them or encouraging them to participate, and what might the unit be able to do to encourage more participation was the gist of my research. So I came away with 3 initial findings based off of 19 interviews with community members, some in English, some in Spanish, some virtual, some in person. And the 3 findings included personal responsibility, community and institutions, and perception of values. So I'll be diving more deeply into personal responsibility today, just for the sake of time. But if you have questions on the other 2 findings, feel free to ask me about them, or they will be a part of my digital report later this semester. So diving into cultivating personal responsibility, get it? Cultivating, it's a garden. That's my joke for the day. So I found through interviews that there were sort of 3 main barriers to participation based on what people were telling me. One big one was time constraints, the second being global inaction, and the third being passivity. General feeling. So time constraints, I really hope that you don't relate to this, but I'm pretty sure most of you do. Life is hard, life is busy, you're involved in a lot of different things, and it can be hard to commit to something new when you already have such a full schedule. This is something that came up in conversations with students, staff, and faculty. This one student here emphasized that she's at school for almost 11 hours a day, and she doesn't live there, so then she has to commute the hour back home at the end of the day, and that makes it very, very difficult for her to get involved in these kinds of programs. She just simply does not have the time, and professors emphasized very similar themes. And this staff member emphasized to me, Carlos, he said that it's difficult because they have to voluntarily dedicate their own time if they do want to participate in these activities. His suggestion was that the university should maybe block time out for sustainability activities so community members have dedicated time to participate, which is not something they currently do. And so it's up to people as individuals to do so. And it makes it hard, again, scheduling, to take that personal responsibility because people are busy. The second point being global inaction. Heike, my point of contact, put this very succinctly. She said, I think people are frustrated that there is not enough international support, And yeah, I know, like it can be frustrating, especially as individuals, to watch global actors, for example, pull out of international environmental accords, and then you feel like if these global actors aren't doing anything, why should I? So that prevents people from sort of taking on that personal responsibility of contributing to sustainable practices because it's hard to see your actions as doing anything when these global actors are not. And the third point being this general sense of passivity. Professors, students, staff members, again, here brought up a lot of feelings of hopelessness or sort of this inability to do anything. This one professor said, well, I can't do anything about this anyway. What am I going to do? Another professor said, my actions are not going to change anything, and so you feel powerless. And this general feeling of passivity, it's hard. It's hard to then tell people when they feel that level of powerlessness to go do something about it. They already feel powerlessness, so it can be hard to sort of break that mental barrier. Now, that being said, there are 3 ways that not only is the program currently trying to address these 3 barriers, but also that they could continue to do so in the future, being a commitment to small changes, development of community, as well as the maintenance of radical hope. So commitment, one Comillas professor used her background in psychology to emphasize the way that developing tiny habits can actually contribute to this commitment to sustainability. And she said that tiny habits can actually improve this feeling of powerlessness, just committing to something small. And this I already saw in the program. The majority of my interviewees were already committed to recycling in their everyday lives, for example. That's a very, very small thing that you're able to do to contribute to the larger environment. So it's something that's already going on and something that the unit can continue to promote in the future. The second being community. This more indirectly came up in my interviews. Jesus, as well as Comias researcher, brought up this idea of doing many small things to change your community, sort of framing sustainability as something you are not individually personally responsible for, but that you are personally responsible for in relation to your community. So it's this responsibility you have as an individual to contribute to a larger community, but sort of taking away this global inaction piece of it and focusing on the local community that you're more connected to can be a really good way, seeing that as a social justice problem in your locality, to frame this to actually drive action and take personal responsibility for sustainability. And the third point is hope. David is the Integral Ecology Unit's sole full-time staff member, and he brought up this idea that we need to feel that there is hope that the future will be better. And I know this can sound like a little bit like, duh, like it seems obvious. If you're hopeless, try to maintain hope. But this maintenance of hope is so incredibly vital in all areas of social justice, because if you focus too much on this global inaction piece or the fact that you feel like you can't do anything, you're not going to do anything, right? So maintaining that hope, feeling like there's a chance even that the future will be better, is something that will allow you to take on that personal responsibility, especially related to sustainability, and actually drive hope moving forward. So moving forward, same Royal Palace, this time at sunset. I plan to further develop these initial findings that I brought up at the beginning into a digital report, and then create a more concrete suggestion list for the environmental programs at Comias as requested by the partner in our initial conversations. Yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Okay, so we are going to go for the second member of the panel. And this picture is perfect because it's her turn.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Allie. I'm a junior in the School of Foreign Service studying international politics. And this summer, I had the opportunity to travel to Spain with all of these lovely people and study a really interesting issue, I guess, but also idea, which is multinational university alliances, and specifically navigating the challenges of doing good within those. As a little context, I was researching an organization called the EU Peace Alliance. The EU Peace Alliance, or the European University for Peace, Justice, and Inclusive Societies, is one of 65 European university alliances funded through Erasmus. Erasmus is an initiative started by the EU to support education and youth in Europe. And this program is on its second year of 4 years of funding, but it's also just generally on its second year of implementation. Who is EU Peace? EU Peace is an intercultural, interreligious, and international alliance. There are 9 universities involved in the initiative, and the initiative is led by staff, graduate students, undergraduate students, and faculty. You can see here that it includes a lot of countries in the EU, but also countries beyond that in the greater Europe. Now, what did I do? Over the course of 3 weeks this summer, I interviewed 16 individuals from 7 of the 9 universities in the EU Peace Alliance through both virtual and in-person interviews relating to their experiences with and relating to perceptions of EU peace. Now, EU Peace spans a very extensive range of initiatives, and I was originally going to focus only on a really small part, the Living Labs initiative. As I was there, I learned that a lot of the Living Labs are still in their implementation phase and are still working through a lot of the initial setup. So I began to expand my focus of my research to encompass the overall experience of EU Peace from people involved. So I'm just going to go a little bit into the structure of EU Peace to give some context. The EU and Erasmus, as I mentioned, are the funders. They've kind of helped set up this initiative, and it is now within the EU Peace Alliance, which is 9 of those different universities, as I already mentioned. So those universities are facilitated by faculty, staff, and students. And they have a goal to involve everybody within the university, from library to IT to every single department in the university, into this initiative. Now, all of these faculty, staff, and students, they work on 8 different focus areas. And the specific focus area that I was mostly looking at was societal dialogues. And that is where the Living Labs initiative is housed. And that is an area that focuses a lot on community engagement and how to address social issues. There are other focus areas that include things like research hubs and transforming curricula and student-professor exchange. That was a lot for me to take in, and if that's a lot for you to take in, that's okay too. I made the analogy that I felt like I was going there initially to try and learn more about this puzzle and see what was happening, but I actually realized that it was a 3D puzzle of a Russian nesting doll as I kept going. So it was very interesting, and I had 3 main takeaways from this experience. The first being that there were many barriers and breakthroughs in this implementation process. Also, the impact of cultural differences on this alliance. It's very interesting to have not only a multinational, but also an alliance that encompasses different religions, different ethnic groups, all different things. It was very interesting to see how even different university cultures can shift how these get implemented. And also the possibilities of what I called inter-alliances, which is that idea of having these international, interreligious, intercultural alliances where you're really trying to work across barriers to make good things happen and try and have a good impact. So my focus today is going to be on those barriers and breakthroughs, which came out a lot in my research. For barriers, some of the barriers described were bureaucratic and institutional challenges, high turnover, and time constraints, pressure, and overcommitment. For bureaucratic and institutional challenges, there were a lot of experiences described relating to this. For bureaucratic challenges, participants described a lot of paperwork and documentation that they had to deal with. For example, this quote explains that you realize that so much of your time is filling out reports, agendas, minutes, and Excel sheets. And there is a lot of logistics and coordinating with both people within the universities and with the communities, but also across the alliances that are a big focus for participants in the alliance. Additionally, there are institutional challenges of navigating the university hierarchies, where maybe leadership in the university doesn't see EU Peace as much of a priority as the participants would like to have it be. And it's, as this quote says, it's very challenging to make the university aware of the strategic value of this alliance. There's also delays that can be caused by changes in university leadership and differences between EU and non-EU regulations. So there's a lot of different moving parts that can cause a lot of challenges here. Additionally, there's a lot of high turnover. Within only the last 2 years, many people who I interviewed had only joined within the last few months, and they expressed that they felt a bit of a low transmission of knowledge, where perhaps their predecessors hadn't shared exactly what they were doing, and having difficulty understanding the terminology from the initial agreement, having come onto the project so recently. This agreement was kind of a top-down agreement by individuals outside of the university and leadership within the university, which meant that a lot of the information has kind of passed down and is now different in its actual implementation than perhaps it was in the ideation phase. And additionally, with turnover and transmission of information, as has been expressed here, some individuals shared that there's a gap between what's expected and what's meant, and is not transmitted completely to the people who are now involved, and that it is a complex project, and getting new people all the time and trying to transmit that information is a really challenging thing. Now, with time constraints, pressure, and overcommitment, many expressed the difficulties of having so many split responsibilities. Teaching, theses, academic research responsibilities, these are all things that a lot of participants are doing on top of any work they're doing with this alliance, which has the goal of implementing so many different programs. And there's been many expressions of concern about the time frame versus the scale of this alliance. As this quote says, it's an ambitious project, and they don't really quite see how it can be accomplished within that time frame, which does lead to concerns about burnout, about people being able to push through this while balancing all their responsibilities, and having only a limited number of people who have the time to be involved because everybody feels that they are busy. So what does this mean for EU peace? Well, despite these barriers, they still do want this alliance to succeed. A lot of people express their passion for the ideas of peace, justice, and inclusive societies, and how important they felt that those ideas were, especially in today's age. And they have a vision for this alliance and being able to truly impact this world. Some shared how they loved the idea of being able to share research and learn from each other's experiences when countries have gone through different things, so that you can work to address issues that some countries may still be learning about. And additionally, they really emphasized overcoming these barriers and not stopping. They want this project to succeed, they want to be a part of it, and they want to see it through despite everything else that is happening. So for here, as it says, for the long term, it is not something that you're going to see results in right now, and they understand that. They understand that they're in this kind of implementation phase, but they're excited to see how they can really work towards having this be a sustainable and long-lasting alliance, and not just a project, but truly something that is integrated and connected to the universities and the communities that the universities are in. They also presented several strategies for navigating and breaking through these barriers, which includes cross-university collaboration, honesty, and strong communication. They really emphasized how great it was to have in-person meetings with people from different universities, to have good communication across the universities, and where they felt really connected to their colleagues across the continent. And they continue to work through delays and pushing ahead to get things done. For example, the living labs, as I mentioned early on, are still in their implementation, but do have a vision for being these places where communities, stakeholders, and other people can come together in a laboratory of people, essentially, to find out ways to address issues facing our society relating to peace, justice, and inclusive societies. And as I mentioned, they really have felt that, like, despite a lot of the barriers and the back and forth, there is a personal alignment with the goals of this project. On my reflections, the barriers and breakthroughs are only part of my broader research. There's so much more to this project and this initiative, and I only got a slice of the whole picture during my time here, but it was a really interesting time in which it was in the implementation or operationalization phase of this project, where they're moving from this to an actual impact on reality for students and communities. They're only on their second year of funding, and they hope to be sustainable much beyond that, and I am very excited to see what will happen and what this alliance could become. Looking forward, as I mentioned, many are looking ahead to see what is to come. Many people are excited to hopefully truly make this alliance have a deep impact on communities. And I would like to extend my appreciation to the Berkeley Center and the CSJ, and also to the partners at Comillas for hosting us. I'm so grateful to have had this experience. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Cece Sprouse, and I'm one of the 4 ESJ fellows. I want to echo the appreciation to Dr. Craig and Dr. Ossini, as well as Loyola University, where Stella and I were located. This has been a truly special experience. To get started, here's a brief table of contents. I'm first going to give an introduction into myself. Then I'm going to give you some context as to my research. I'm sorry. I'm going to give you 3 of my initial findings, in which I'll dive deeper into 1, the embodiment of Jesuit values, and I will conclude with the next steps of my research project. So like I said, my name is Cece Sprouse. I'm a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm majoring in Justice and Peace Studies with minors in Government and Spanish. Like Madison, my interest really lies at this intersection of social justice and education. So this was a truly special experience for me. And post-graduation, I hope to continue to pursue that as a youth development facilitator in Panama with the Peace Corps. So for the research context of my project, like I said, I was located at Loyola University in Sevilla, Spain, alongside Stella. Here's a photo that she took of me on the last day of my interviews. This is a relatively small university. There's around 4,000 undergraduate and graduate degree students. It is a relatively new university as well. It was founded in 2012. And Sevilla is the capital of Andalusia. So on the next slide, you'll see Andalusia is the southernmost state in Sevilla. And that was particularly relevant to my research as well. So here are 3 pieces of context that I wanted to highlight for you all today. The first is religious identity. As Madison briefly mentioned in her presentation, Spain has a very complex history of religion with Christian and Islamic influence. However, now Sevilla is predominantly Catholic, and it's also home to La Semana Santa, a very important religious holiday, and so it's really seen as this center of Catholicism. But why is that relevant to my research? The volunteer programs that I was studying, these were located underneath their service of evangelicalization and dialogue. So unlike here at Georgetown University, you have the Center for Social Justice and you have campus ministry. These 2 things are very distinct departments here at Georgetown. At Loyola University, where I was doing my research, these were actually combined, so they're very interconnected. The second piece of relevant context is Northern African influence. So as you'll see here on this map, Andalusia is the southernmost state in Spain. And not only is that relevant to the history of Andalusia and Sevilla, but it also means that with the refugee crisis experienced in Europe and Northern Africa and the Middle East, this has had a direct impact on Sevilla. The strategic plan of Sevilla has directly called for nonprofit and government organizations to seek to support these communities specifically. So a lot of the nonprofits that I was conducting my interviews at, they were directly supporting refugee communities and asylum-seeking individuals. And a lot of the students that I was interviewing were doing the same. They were going into these communities of previously displaced individuals and families in order to complete their community service. The last piece of context that I wanted to highlight was economic disparity. So in Andalusia, there are some of the lowest earning household incomes in all of Spain, and specifically in Sevilla, there's a neighborhood called Pajaritos, which I traveled to conduct various different interviews at, and these are some of the most economically vulnerable populations in all of Spain. This became particularly relevant to my research as the students that I was interacting with were each paying minimum of around 7,000 euros a year to be able to complete their education. But there was a clear divide between where they were going to conduct their community service, oftentimes in some of the most economically vulnerable areas. And so there was kind of that tension and that disparity between the 2 different lived experiences. So now I'm going to play a video of Juan. He is a coordinator for volunteering at Loyola underneath their Service of Evangelicalization and Dialogue. And here he's going to be describing the mission and the goal of these volunteer programs. It's going to be in Spanish, but I will have subtitles. Those are in Spanish, sorry. Sorry,
¿Por qué realizar un voluntariado durante la época que estáis estudiando en la universidad? Pues bueno, esta precisamente es la propuesta del Servicio de Evangelización y Diálogo del SED. Nosotros trabajamos con varias entidades, tanto de Sevilla como de Córdoba, que tratan de mejorar la calidad de vida de la gente que está a nuestro alrededor. Es una buena oportunidad para ampliar la mirada y salir de nuestra zona de confort. Nos da también capacidades para entrenar nuestra empatía y el trabajo en equipo. Si quieres vivir una experiencia y sentir que estás aportando tu granito de arena, esta es tu oportunidad.
So So the reason I wanted to show that video is that Juan was really fundamental in the design of my research. Long before I arrived to Spain, we were really discussing the goals of SED and the goals of these volunteer programs. And he really felt as though it was fueled by this idea of instilling Jesuit values, instilling this student development outside of the classroom, giving students another opportunity to grow themselves academically, personally, and also spiritually. And so when we were talking about this experience, we wanted to also look at how were students perceiving this experience. Was the goal and the mission of SED actually trickling down into the people conducting the community service? And so this is how we designed my research question, which was, how do students perceive and value their volunteer experiences? In order to get a little bit further into defining what service learning is, I wanted to explain that this is essentially an innovative approach to creating learning opportunities outside of the classroom, as Juan mentioned. Stella and I were also lucky enough at Loyola to attend a conference on Hope 25, where I attended breakout sessions about service learning, and I was able to hear from professors all around the world about ways that they are using community service as a means of creating growth. And so this was also kind of fueled my project and understanding the connection between service learning and community service and how those things are interrelated. So what did volunteering look like with SED? Essentially, each student that signed up for these programs committed about 2 hours a week to one of 24 local nonprofits. And Juan did this in a very interesting way. He would essentially do an interview with each individual student and partner them up with a local nonprofit based on their academic and their personal interests. And as well as there were international volunteer opportunities. And so unlike here at Georgetown, where oftentimes these are very group-based community service, here it was very individualized. And I think that's particularly relevant to the idea of seeing this community service as an opportunity for service learning. Here's one student experience at a glance to give you an idea of what that looked like. The student studied law and criminology, and they volunteer at Fundación Padre Garalda. So they talk here about how, thanks to this volunteer experience, they were able to take things from their degree and put them into practice. So I'll get into this a little bit later in my initial findings, but this just kind of demonstrates how Juan really worked on partnering people with their academic interests with an organization such as this one, where essentially the student would go into the carceral system and teach lessons to people that are incarcerated and take care of the children of incarcerated women. And so in that way, it was very directly related between what they were studying as well as the community service that they were completing. So my data, I conducted 18 different interviews in Spanish. I tried to really get the vocality of this experience. I interviewed students, undergraduate as well as graduate. I interviewed professors that had students in these experiences. And I also interviewed representatives from these partnering organizations to see the way that they perceived what these volunteer opportunities were like. Oftentimes these are around 45 to 65-minute interviews, and Stella will also get a little bit further into this conference that I mentioned previously. So as for my initial findings, based on what my participants said, I identified 3 different areas of value and perceptions of these volunteer experiences. The first was social emotional transformation. So there's this idea that students felt as though they were able to come to a better understanding of themselves through these volunteer experiences. They were able to understand their positionality, their privilege in the world. They were also able to strengthen their interpersonal relationships with people from entirely different countries, people who spoke entirely different languages, and they really valued that ability to interact with those people. And lastly, under this bucket was venturing into the unknown. This was oftentimes described as exiting your comfort zone, and people perceived that as a very big part of their volunteer experience. The second category was academic and professional development. So as I mentioned with service learning, there's this idea of applying theory into practice. Students oftentimes described how in a classroom they learned one theory, they read one book, and they were able to actually use that whenever they were conducting their community service, and also vice versa. They were able to take lived experiences and lessons from their community service at these local nonprofits and apply them to their projects or their presentations in the classroom. Also, there was this development of professional skills. Juan mentioned this as well, but students felt this as well. They were able to build teamwork. They were able to build time management skills and organizational skills. And lastly, there was discovering long-term and career goals. It was really special to hear a lot of my interviewees actually change the entire course of their life through these community service programs, because they no longer wanted to work a typical job. They wanted to work a job that matched the values and the goals of SED and what Juan was trying to instill through these community service programs. The last finding that I have is the embodiment of Jesuit values, and this will be the one that I have time to dive into today. So as Juan mentioned, SED and these volunteer programs are very much fueled by Jesuit values, something that we talk a lot about here at Georgetown. And I wanted to see if this was actually the way that students were perceiving it. Were they feeling those Jesuit values when they were going and completing this community service? And in fact, they were. Even though around half of the students that I interviewed were not religious or did not self-identify as religious in any way, they still referred to these Jesuit values, just in different language. And so I'm going to be explaining that a little bit further. The three different Jesuit values were cura personalis, this idea of care for the whole person, something we talk a lot about here at Georgetown. The second was promotion of justice, and the last was care for a common good. So for the first one, cura personalis, the way that these students described this was oftentimes this idea of spiritual enrichment. So not only at Loyola were they able to develop themselves in the classroom academically, they were able also to do that in a spiritual way. They were going to these community service organizations, and they were leaving with a sense of joy, a sense of fulfillment. So even for students that didn't feel any sort of connection to God, they were still having that third realm of development through this community service. So one participant explained, helping someone gives me a deep sense of peace. And another one describes this thing as something that stirs you inside. So it's this third kind of unknown feeling that could be spiritual, it could be connected to a belief in a higher being, or it could not be. It could be this connected to empathy or just like this strive for human good. The next one was sharing community. And so this is typically in Jesuit values referred to as care for our common home. Students really talked a lot about this idea of contributing to their community members of Sevilla. So not only in Loyola, but they were talking about this larger community, this community of Sevilla, including people very different from them, talking about Spain, and also international. I interviewed various different people that conducted communities, or completed community service abroad for people that they saw as their neighbors simply by living on this shared earth together. And so whether that earth was created by God or not, they still felt that need and that obligation to help other people living in this shared earth. So they talk about, there's a couple of quotes from different participants, but we should work together to make a better world and impact our local community. This idea that you have an obligation to your neighbor, whether you're religious or not. And the last was pursuit of equity. Oftentimes in Jesuit values, this is referred to as a promotion of justice. So students really felt as though they were able to create a more common playing field for people in their community through this community service. And that's something that they really valued. Whether that, like I said, was inspired by Jesuit values or inspired by a belief in Catholicism, people still felt this need to basically give other people the opportunity to live the life that they did. So one participant says, giving others the chance to live just like everyone else was something that they really valued with their community service. Oh, we're missing a slide. But essentially, after completing all of this research, I really was reflecting a lot on my personal growth through community service, and my experience conducting this research made me reflect a lot on how that's changed me as a person. And so I also really wanted to pose this question to you all of how do you think community service has impacted you, and if you think that it has fueled values, and if these align to Jesuit values, whether you're Catholic or not. So the next steps for my research, I will finalize my conclusions and implications of this. I will then publish this research alongside the other fellows online. So I would love if you looked further into the other key findings of my research. And lastly, I will present recommendations to Juan and SED and ways to improve their community service. Because despite this being a very positive reflection, there are things that SED could do to further their mission of Jesuit values. I'm realizing that the question is here. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I'm Stella Vance. I am the last of the 4 ESJ fellows, and I was also in Loyola this summer with CC and in Spain with the rest of everyone. My presentation is on a pedagogy of proximity, student formation and identity and mission courses at Loyola University, and I was personally located in Sevilla. So my presentation will flow the same way that my other fellows have. I'll begin with an introduction about myself and why I was interested in conducting this research in the first place. So I'm Stella Vance. I'm a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm studying Justice and Peace Studies with a minor in Religion, Ethics, and World Affairs. I'm from Bozeman, Montana, and I'm very interested in education as a tool to advance social justice and to build equitable societies. I've personally been involved in the implementation and development of a lot of social justice initiatives related to education. And so I felt especially lucky to get to go to Spain and get to kind of look at how Loyola has created their educational opportunities for students in line with their mission and goals. So a little bit of context about the University of Loyola. Loyola University is a group of 3 campuses in the south of Spain and Andalusia. There's one campus in Sevilla, one campus in Cordoba, and one campus in Granada. I was lucky to get to do research across all 3 of them, although I was primarily located in Sevilla. Loyola University is also a part of multiple networks that connect them to other Jesuit universities. They're a part of the International Association of Jesuit Universities, which, for example, Georgetown is also part of. And they're a part of UNIJES, which is basically a group of 10 Jesuit institutions in Spain. This collaboration allows them to connect with these institutions, making the research that they do just at Loyola or just at the campus in Sevilla really instrumental in the lives of 60,000 students across Spain. So these networks really amplify their impact. Also, I want to give a little bit of context about the educational structure in Spain. So in Spain, the way that college works is a little bit different than in the US. Students specialize a lot earlier. So they pick a major when they first get into college, freshman year. I learned all of this through discussing with professors and students there. And then there's a lot less opportunity to take things like electives or change your course of study throughout your time, as opposed to the US or at Georgetown, where we don't even declare a major usually until sophomore year. These classrooms are also a lot more lecture-based. There's kind of a horizontal structure in these classrooms where professors impart education onto students, students take notes, especially because Loyola is a STEM school. There's not a lot of room for like pushing back or questioning professors, whereas in the US we see a little bit more of a participatory approach that invites more debate into classrooms. And the professors that I spoke with that had taught both in Spain and the US noted that this was a big difference in how students experience education in the 2 countries. So my research particularly looked at a cluster of 4 courses housed in the Identity and Mission Department of this university. These are the translated titles of the 4 courses. And basically these courses are taken by students in their final year of university to help them integrate the values that they have learned at their time in Loyola into their sense of personal identity and relationship with the world before graduating and going on to be professionals after getting their diploma. Although students are only required to take one of these 4 courses, I spoke with some that took all 4. They might be graduating a little bit late because of that, but they're really special courses, and this is one of the only places where students might have the autonomy to pick between these classes compared to like a more straight trajectory in a major. So they really, really enjoyed these classes. So my research and methodology, while I was there, I was really interested in exploring how students experience these identity and mission courses, particularly in relation to their sense of developing their own identity, and also professors' experiences in designing and implementing these courses and how that may have transformed over time. So I did this through conducting 15 semi-structured interviews and doing participant observation all in Spanish during my time there. A huge part of this was facilitated by the Hope 25 conference, which Cece mentioned earlier. This conference was an international conference on basically how education can be used as a tool to advance social justice, very in line with our fellowship here. It brought in researchers and professionals from around the world at different universities to come in and speak. So this was huge for developing background context, doing background research, and a lot of informal conversations. I was able to participate in panels on how groups of maybe 20 different researchers and educators had developed their pedagogy to be aligned with their school's identity and mission, which was huge for understanding how different institutions are tackling this problem. So my findings, I have 3 main findings. I will also only have time to go into 1 today. But the first is the unique orientation of professors toward their students in these classrooms. They have a really collaborative, open, and comparatively vulnerable approach to relating to their students in these classrooms. The formation, both the formation of the class itself, the form of the courses, and also the student and professor formation through participating in the classes, and then the transformation that students undergo in their personal identity throughout taking the classes. Students talked about really changing their perception of other cultures and their own place in the world through participating in these. So again, today I'll be focusing on formation, but feel free to ask about any of the others.
So the aspects of formation include the proximal instruction and learning environments in these classrooms, the professor values and their personal sense of formation, dialogue and debate being central to forming these classes, and then the fact that these classes reach beyond just a vocational or theoretical approach, which is very unique, especially at this university and also in universities across Spain. So proximal instruction. By this I mean the proximity of the person teaching the material to the material being taught. So a lot of these professors are also practitioners and experts in their field. The man who teaches leadership and social change has founded and run multiple NGOs and social justice organizations, and then brings in people from those organizations and local groups in Sevilla to teach students. There's also religious leaders that come in from multiple faith traditions to give their testimony and take really open comments and questions from students, which students describe as a super unique experience, especially in the very Catholic context of Spain, the south of Spain, and then this Jesuit university. So some students said they had never had an open and vulnerable conversation with someone with a different religious identity than they did, and that this really transformed maybe prejudices or preconceived ideas that they had had. The next is proximal learning. So that's kind of the experiential learning and hands-on engagement with the material being taught throughout these courses. This might look like internships and volunteering, final projects that are about relating what you've learned to actually work that you're doing, so going into the community, helping an NGO, helping a social justice organization, not just staying in like a theoretical mode, but actually applying what you're learning. Interreligious interaction is huge, and then also just kind of moving into the goals of the courses. One administrator who runs the humanities department said that these opportunities are like an example of the Jesuit value of contemplation and action, and his idea that virtue is practiced, it's not just reflected on. And I think that the structure of these classes really mirrors that goal and the goal of a lot of Jesuit universities, and had a huge effect on students. So professor values and formation. Professors really express that throughout their time of teaching these classes, maybe for 7 years. Like Cece said, this is a pretty young university, but some of these courses have been there since the start. They've really transformed how they gave and delivered their classes. So maybe at first there was more theory, there was more reading, it was kind of up here, and throughout their courses, history and development, they've changed to a very much more experiential model. There's like a lack of lectures in a lot of these classes. Students co-create the classrooms, which I think is really special and unique in a very vertical school in general. So this co-creating of classrooms, one professor said that he believes that the search for learning is shared, and there's this idea of a journey that he wants students to go on with him throughout their time in the class and to be a part of creating. This really upholds the respect and dignity of students, which obviously is present throughout the university, but students pointed this out over and over, that in these classes they feel like the fullest version of themselves. They feel completely dignified and shared, that this was really fundamental for their personal development and the development of their identity before they go out and exist not as students but as professionals in society. And then the vulnerability and closeness in these classrooms. There's this Spanish idea of cercanía, or a type of intimacy that was present between professors and students in these classrooms. And this is specifically relevant because these classes were touching on personal identity material, which isn't common in other ones. Professors express that this idea of fewer barriers and less formality in classes is really unique here. This is Professor Jose Valverde, who I worked really closely with. He was my main point of contact. He runs the identity and mission department and also delivers the class on leadership and social change, and this is him speaking at the conference. So they invite a lot of dialogue and debate into their classroom. Dialogue in the sense that students speak with their professors, they speak with other people in the classroom, which isn't always the case in classes at this school. And then debate. They actually get to bring in their full sense of self and question what they're learning, which really helps them integrate these values into their personal identity. Whereas they express that in other classes, there might be a right or a wrong, or a search for distilling the truth. Here there's just learning, they said. And one student said it reminds him of what he thought the university was, which was this space where he could really question what he was learning in an effort to become the best version of himself. This process allowed classes to move beyond a simply vocational or theoretical approach. So in a lot of classes, students said that they felt like they were being prepared to be useful professionals when they enter the Spanish workforce. But in these classes, they were invited to show up as their full sense of self, not to have to compartmentalize their identity, but that they could express their identity and kind of integrate what they were learning into their true development of themselves. This also involved moving beyond a theoretical approach to actually applying what they were learning, trying things out, seeing what worked for them and what didn't. So my further steps, I'll be expanding on my other findings, including the orientation of professors toward their students in classrooms and also the transformation that students undergo throughout these classes in a digital report that I'll publish by the end of the year. But until then, I just want to say thank you so much to my community partners. They were absolutely critical in doing this work, and they just welcomed us so openly. Also, of course, thank you to Dr. Craig and Husseini for all of your help and guidance, and to Cece, who was such a great sounding board while I was in Spain, and since I've come back and have been dealing with all of the data and analyzing it. So thank you all for being here.
We have 10 minutes for questions. Very good. So we can get questions from the room or from Zoom. For the ones here, please raise your hand and they will bring you a mic. And the ones on Zoom, please write your questions on the chat, and somebody here will read those questions aloud.
Thank you so much, ESJ Fellows. My question, it first came to my head with Madison's presentation, but I think it actually pertains to maybe all of you, but I'm not sure. But Madison, you mentioned conducting interviews both in English and in Spanish. And I don't think Spanish is the first language for any of you, I could be wrong, but I'm just curious what that's like, you know, especially you conducted your interviews in both languages, but for all of you, if you conducted it in Spanish, what did that feel like to you? Like right at the end there, Stella was talking about like certain words that describe in Spanish what she was hearing, and so I'm just really interested in that, being able to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Whistler, for the question. I would say that for me, it's a very similar experience to just generally doing qualitative interviews based on our training. You have to go in with this like posture of humility. You're really there to listen. So it wasn't like I was very aware of my own positionality, being someone who learns Spanish as a second language, speaks Spanish as a second language, and just very much being open to asking questions when I didn't understand something. It was a little bit overwhelming, I would say, more so there are different accents in Spain. Some of them were more difficult for me to understand than others, but I feel like it wasn't that much different than just generally interviewing somebody. It was just maintaining that humility.
Because I can touch on mine briefly. Mine, because there were people from different countries, a lot of the language was, like, a lot of the interviews were conducted in English, but there were some in Spanish as well. So a lot of different, just kind of navigating different experiences and learning and hearing from different people. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I think Stella also mentioned this as well, but we arrived with the idea that we would be using some English, and in Sevilla specifically interacted with no one that really spoke any English. And so it definitely challenged us initially. I think for my research process, it was actually like quite beneficial. Whenever I was like doing the translation kind of process, a lot of people would ask me like, what's your research about? And it would really force me to articulate exactly what it was about, because I had to translate it every single time. And I also think that it was useful in creating these comparisons between the values that the students were feeling and the Jesuit values, because a lot of that was looking at language and like how people are referring to those values. So in that way, I think the Spanish was actually beneficial, and it was really enjoyable to be able to use it in that way.
I totally agree. I had a pretty similar experience to Cece in that way. I think that especially translating and then coding in both Spanish and English and moving between the two really just helped me think about things on a deeper level and from multiple perspectives that I might not have otherwise. It was kind of funny when we were first all kind of trying to talk about our research, because it was a little bit clunky sometimes, because you're kind of thinking about it in one way and what does this word really mean, and cercanía and intimacy, but like a very professional intimacy, and like how do you explain that? So yeah, I think it helped us kind of get a very deep understanding of what we were looking at.
Could you talk more about building connections within the communities that you were studying? So why it was really valuable for you to be there in person and to make these connections with the people that you were researching. So I'm sure it was difficult to, build trust so that people would open up to you, but all of those things, just being an individual and connecting with them on a personal level.
Yeah, I can start because I think Juan, my point contact at Loyola, he was really fundamental in that. As I mentioned in my presentation, he personally interviewed every person that did these community service programs. And so I was able to really use his network. He sent out an email saying, hey, here's this Georgetown student from the US conducting this research, and people immediately signed up. I had over 30 people who initially filled out my survey to do these interviews. And it's not like here at Georgetown where, oh, well, is there a prize or some sort of gift card that I'm getting? No, these people genuinely wanted to share about their community service experience, and that was honestly, I think, also indicative of my finding that this was very transformative for them to go through this community service experience. So.
I think for me, it was important to be there in person. I learned after I was there because a lot of times when I would turn off the recorder and the formal interview stopped, I would start getting questions from my interviewees. And so I feel like that's where a lot of the real conversations came into place, even though they're not formally a part of my research. I had a lot of conversations with people on an informal basis about those sort of international actors and what we're seeing on the political level when it relates to sustainability. And those conversations just did not come up in my formal questioning because I think it took that formal conversation for people to be willing to open up, which made being in person so much more vital to my research because it allowed me to actually understand where they were coming from, even if they didn't want to say it on the record, if that makes sense.
I'm curious a little bit about how transferable you all found kind of your findings here and how much you think that they would apply the same in the US. Specifically, Stella, I know you talked about how a lot of the classes in Spain are there's a bigger power dynamic between the students and the professors, and if you think that, if these sorts of courses were to be implemented somewhere like Georgetown, if it would have as much of an effect, and how transferable you think that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Catherine. I think this kind of echoes back to the importance of being there, because when I first started talking to students and they said, well, it's really important to me that we dialogue in the classroom, I was like, yeah, that seems pretty important. At Georgetown, we do that all the time. Our classrooms, so many classrooms, especially in the Justice and Peace Studies department, which Cece and I are both in, and across this entire school, are centered in bringing in student voices and encouraging us to really develop our own sense of place in this world and how we relate to other people. And so the answer really is that I think that we do a really good job of this at Georgetown, and I feel really privileged to have an education that invites me to seriously grapple with what I'm learning. And not to say that people at this university normally aren't doing that, it's just, I think also the STEM nature of the university has a little bit less space for that. But I really think that the findings show that the more that we can prioritize a horizontal classroom where students feel like they're genuinely invited to engage with their professors and peers on deep levels, to get to more vulnerable places and really question what they're learning, it seriously impacts your education and the way that it kind of sinks in for you. So I think that the more that we can have of that, the better. But I also think that it was a big finding for me that isn't common in Spain, or to learn about the context that isn't as common in other places, and it made me even more grateful to be here.
Yeah, with mine, it was a very interesting thing because I had never heard about kind of a multinational alliance between universities happening in other contexts. I think it would be lovely if it was very transferable to this context. I think this is an early stage in their initiative, and I think if it continues to go well, it could be a model of how universities can collaborate and kind of be that go-between between governments and communities and pre-professionals, and have all of those different people engaged and trying to make an impact. So I would love to see that kind of transfer around as well.
Time to answer this one as well. Yeah, I was also thinking a lot. I know I mentioned in my presentation comparisons with here at the Center for Social Justice, as well as their volunteer programs. I think the key differentiation between the two was one being very group and one being very individualized. And I would say the conclusion that I would take from that differentiation is that there's value to both. These individuals were able to find a program that directly matched what they wanted to do with their life, with their career, and what they were learning about in the classroom. But they also felt as though sometimes they were lacking that sense of community. They would go into these organizations and not really know anyone, and like I think that also limited the amount of people in the university that were completing and signing up for them, because they kind of didn't really know anyone that did it, and so it was like kind of this abstract thing, versus here at Georgetown, you go in groups of 10, you meet people through those. It's seen as like a community builder, and so in that way it's positive, but it also means that you're not having as like individualized as an experience, and it may not be as applicable to what you're learning in the classroom.
Very good, very good. So thank you, everybody. It was really interesting, all of your research projects, and I would like to to thank you, everybody, fellows, partners, and participants here and on Zoom. And now we will have a break. It's going to be 50 minutes, and we will reconvene with our second panel.